Kickoff in Nashville is just around the corner as the Vanderbilt Commodores, full of optimism, return to the field soon. Helping us break down the 2025 season and preview everything, Vandy, good friend of the show, friend of mine, Will Byrum of the Dore Report. Nobody does it better when it comes to talking all things down on the West End. Will, what's going on, man? Appreciate you taking the time. Excited to be doing this with you. We've done many shows together, but excited to be doing this show with you, both of us in the same city, my friend. Feels good to say that. What's going on?
I was about to open it up asking you how you've enjoyed Nashville the last few months or however long you've been here now. So I'm doing good. Wondering how you're doing in one of the best cities in the country.
Oh, it's really boring. I definitely haven't been going out or been going to pool parties or been.
Of course not.
None of that. none of those extracurricular festivities. No, it's been great, dude. Love the neighborhood. Love the city. Yeah, it's hard to put into words, man. It's like you said, it's the best city in the country. It's just incredible. So we've had a blast. I feel like I will say this, Will. I'm getting conditioned, if you know what I mean, for our 15-plus week SEC Unfiltered tour. So I'm getting into game shape as we speak. It's fall camp for everyone, if you know what I mean. So
off-season reps are key, Chris.
And we are never missing an opportunity to get a rep in, my friend. The boys are staying hot. Trust me. That being said, Will, let's talk this Vanderbilt football team. Really exciting times. Before we look at 2025, preview this season, go deep dive, I want to talk a little bit and look back, if you don't mind, on what happened in 2024 and how it got us here. Because I recall you and I talking around this time last year, the vibes were much different, right? I mean, we were questioning if Vandy was going to win an SEC game. We were questioning whether Clark Lee had a future in Nashville, and nobody knew the name Diego Pavia at that point outside of the people that, really followed the program super closely like you guys and, some of the diehards down here in Nashville. But my goodness, we all learned very quickly. Heck, week one when Vandy beat Virginia Tech, Dores goes 7-6. 3-5 in conference play. I obviously mentioned the Virginia Tech game. It was highlighted, though, by that win over Alabama, the first ever win over number one in school history. The goalpost. I hate I wasn't here for that, Will, because now I've been to Broadway a few times. I've been around the city, and I can't help but think I'm looking around like, how did they get that goalpost all the way to the Cumberland River? But they sure as hell did. About 2 miles or so, took it down to the river. One of the great moments in college football history, I would say, that upset. And, oh, by the way, you cap off the season in the bowl game, beating Georgia Tech in the Birmingham Bowl. Diego Pavia becomes a household name. Eli Stowers, same thing. You have a defense that was a big-time surprise. I say all that, Will, looking back on the 2024 season, how do you put into words what happened last year?
Man, that's a tough question to put into words. So I'll start it off. You mentioned the Virginia Tech game to start, and I'll keep this relatively brief. I mean, the Virginia Tech game going into that Vanderbilt, I think, was 14.5-point underdog. That game is very overshadowed by what happened against Alabama. That was a huge upset that put Vanderbilt a little bit on the map and got people knowing Diego Pavia just a little bit, because that Virginia Tech team was a quote-unquote dark horse in the ACC. That's what everybody was saying. They had Tutu, they had Kyron Drones, they had a bunch of talent on that roster, and Vanderbilt came out and beat them. I mean, I know it ended up going into overtime, and Vanderbilt almost collapsed, and classically, Vanderbilted their way into a loss. But that game in and of itself kind of showed how this team was different. They fell apart a little bit, but they found a way to win. Finding a way to win is not a way that you would describe Vanderbilt football outside of maybe the James Franklin years. They find ways to lose. This last season, I mean, we were going into it having this conversation like, where do you go from here? Because there was hype going into the 2023 season. Everything fell apart. Vanderbilt went 2-10, revamped the entire roster, changed up the entire coaching staff. You've got this guy who there's a little bit of hope around in Diego Pavia, Conference USA Offensive Player of the Year, but then again, he's 5'10", kind of a little bit of an odd build, 5'10", not the fastest, but he's a running quarterback, not the best arm, but he can throw it a little bit. And he came out and just shocked everyone. I mean, following it really closely the way I do, we kind of had, I would say, cautiously optimistic expectations for Diego Pavia, but he blew every expectation we had completely out of the water. Last year was an odd one because it started out, I would say the first 6-7 games, I would describe it as, even this word feels wrong, magical. But then they lost to Georgia State in the middle of that and had a double overtime loss to Missouri on a missed 38-yard field goal from their electric kicker, Brock Taylor. So it was a roller coaster of a season, might be the best way to describe it, and a roller coaster in a good way. I mean, there were high highs and there were low lows, and ultimately it ended on a very high note, which is why I think a lot of this positivity has been breathed into the 2025 season. Vanderbilt closed out the year with three straight losses. But a lot of that, at the regular season at least, but a lot of that in a lot of minds of Vanderbilt fans was this team was just beat up. Diego Pavia openly stated that he got his leg rolled up on in the Kentucky game and just wasn't 100% after that. Vanderbilt fans know Cedric Alexander wasn't 100%. Their starting running back, AJ Newberry, was banged up. Their other kind of pass-catching running back. The entire team was just beat up. And you saw this team with about a month of rest going into the Birmingham Bowl, playing a damn good Georgia Tech team with Haynes King, and Vanderbilt came out and beat them. I mean, they didn't just kind of sneak by them. They were up, I think, 35-13 at one point and allowed Georgia Tech to sneak back in and make that final score 35-27. But you saw how good this Vanderbilt team can be when they are healthy. Now, the depth, that's a question mark. But if this team can stay healthy, I don't think there's a single game on this upcoming schedule that you say Vanderbilt has zero chance in. Now, that doesn't mean they're a favorite or anything, but that's a very rare thing to say as a Vanderbilt fan.
Will, I mentioned Clark Lee heading into his fifth season. Again, last year really changed the trajectory, I feel like, in the conversation around him. And, certainly we knew that, hey, Clark Lee, he's one of your own, right? I mean, he played at Vanderbilt. He bleeds the black and gold. We said that last year. Great fit. I mean, all the positive accolades, but we all know, Will, SEC football, it's about wins and losses. I mean, this is a business. This is what have you done for me lately business, and we all agreed last year was a big one. Well, he answered the bell, and I think defensively you saw that. I'm curious, again, talk about Clark Lee. How much different amongst you guys have a better pulse on the Vanderbilt fan base, I'd argue, than anybody out there. How much different is the energy and the feelings around Clark Lee this time of year than it was at this point last year heading into the 25 season?
Indescribable. It might be an easy term, but I always use the quote or old story, and I think I might have used it last year, where it's a coach gets handed 3 envelopes or when he gets hired, and the first one says blame your predecessor. And he's actually told when he gets these 3 envelopes from the previous coach, it says every time something gets hard or there's a fork in the road, open one of these envelopes. And he opens the first one, it says blame your predecessor and blame the talent he left you. Well, Clark Lee did that. He kind of pulled that card out when he lost to FCS ETSU in 2021 to open his coaching career. And fans accepted that. I mean, he was left, let's be frank, and I'm going to curse here, a dog shit roster when he took over. Then 2023 happened. That's kind of out the window. So he opened up envelope number 2, and it said, blame the coaching staff. And Clark Lee blamed the coaching staff. He cleared house. I think he learned from his mistakes, maybe hiring guys that he had good relationships with personally versus hiring guys that maybe were the right person for the job. And thankfully, he doesn't have to open envelope number 3 yet, because envelope number 3 tells you go out, buy 3 envelopes. But Clark Lee made the adjustments, and right now, honestly, I can say there's never such a thing as an ice cold seat. I mean, truly, if Clark Lee goes out and goes 3-9, 4-8 this upcoming season with this returning talent, I mean, the seat's going to get hot. I'm not going to lie to you. I don't anticipate that happening, but the mindset around Clark Lee is completely positive from the entire fan base. He's your own guy. He's not going to pull a James Franklin on you and abandon you for Penn State the moment he gets a better job offer. He bleeds black and gold, like you said. He was a walk-on fullback. He's from Nashville. He's got Barton Simmons working as the general manager, his best friend that he grew up playing football with. So the fan base is behind Clark Lee, and the questions about his quiet/cerebral nature, I think, have been answered a little bit by him bringing in guys like Jerry Kill, who are kind of the antithesis to Clark Lee's coaching style. And it showed that Clark Lee can adjust. He can learn from his mistakes and improve and realize maybe he's not the guy with all the answers in the world. So the fan base is completely behind Clark Lee at this point. I mean, it would take a string of really bad seasons to put him back on the hot seat.
Well, let's talk this 2025 Vandy football team. I want to start on the offensive side. And, of course, the big headliner over the offseason was, hey, Diego Pavia, he beat Virginia Tech. He beat Alabama. He beat the NCAA as well in a legal battle that allowed him to come back for this season and man the quarterback position in Nashville yet again. Obviously, Will, he's been making the rounds all off season long on podcasts and certainly at SEC Media Days, and you got to love the confidence, the moxie, going out there in Atlanta saying, hey, I didn't come back to go 7-5 or what have you. I came back to win the Heisman Trophy and win a national championship. So they haven't had that kind of energy there in a long time. He certainly brings it, and we know what he does on the field. He's got 4 new starters on the offensive line. They're going to be trying to protect him and open some holes for that running game. Eli Stowers is back as the top pass catcher at tight end, maybe the best tight end in the entire SEC and one of the best certainly in college football. Junior Sherrill does come back and leads the receiving corps. Trent Hudson, who spent time at New Mexico State and Mississippi State, a guy they're looking to emerge, and Cedric Alexander back at the running back position. So, obviously all the conversation, Will, it's going to be around Diego Pavia every single week. But when you look at this offense in 2025, what are you expecting from this group on a week-in, week-out basis?
So Diego Pavia takes the headlines, and that's deserved, I would say. And he's certainly brought a lot of the attention upon himself, whether you want to call it positive or negative. He's brought attention on himself with some of the quotes, but at the same time, that's what you want your quarterback to think like. And regardless, he's not doing it for clicks. I think Diego Pavia has a couple screws loose, and he truly believes that Vanderbilt will be competing for a national championship this year, and he will be in the Heisman race. I mean, hell, last year in week 5 or week 4, he was kind of close to that. Looking at this offense as a whole, I know Diego Pavia gets the headlines, like I said, but the best player on this roster is Eli Stowers. I mean, you said he might be the best tight end in the SEC. He is the best tight end in the SEC. He is the best tight end in the country, according to PFF, according to a lot of very early mock drafts. If he comes out and even does partially what he's expected to do, he's going to be a first-round draft pick. He has every single tool that you were looking for in the ever-important NFL tight end room. The rest of this offense, I'll start with the positives. The running back room, I think, is strong this year. They return everything in that run game. Diego Pavia was the leading rusher last year, 193 carries, I think, 800 or so yards, 8 touchdowns. But Cedric Alexander's back. Beginning of the season, he was electric, got a little banged up and wasn't quite the same guy. AJ Newberry is another name. He's a pass-catching running back out of the backfield. And then there's a guy not getting a lot of talk outside of Vanderbilt circles, and that's MK Young, a transfer from New Mexico State. One of the big issues on this Vanderbilt offense was they had no explosive plays in the running game. They were really good at picking up those 3, 5, 8, 12-yard rushes, but you never saw a 50-plus yard rush outside of backup quarterback Nate Johnson against FCS Alcorn State. I believe outside of Nate Johnson, who's now transferred back to Utah and is now a wide receiver, I think Vanderbilt's longest rush last year was 36 yards. So that was an aspect that they just missed. Every single drive was 13 plays, 15 plays, or it was a pass over the top and play action. They're hoping that MK Young can provide that big play capability. On the outside, wide receiver, there's a lot of question marks. Their number 1 wide receiver, Junior Sherrill, returns. That's a big piece to have back. Had that huge catch on 4th down against Alabama. But they lost Quincy Skinner Jr., who was kind of an underrated guy on the outside, made some key catches against Virginia Tech at the beginning of the year, made a key catch in the Birmingham Bowl, beating Georgia Tech. But they brought in guys in the transfer portal. And these are guys, I don't know if they're going to do anything. These are all guys that are going to kind of make or break this pass game. You already mentioned Trent Hudson, one of Pavia's favorite targets when he was at New Mexico State in 2023. I believe like 51 catches, 651 yards, 10 touchdowns. Somebody can fact check me on those stats. I'm doing this off the dome. They also brought in a D2 transfer, probably the most intriguing transfer they brought in on the offensive side of the ball, in Trey Richardson from Washburn. Had like 950 something yards and 10 touchdowns. Is an absolute speed demon. Ran like a 10-3 100 meter, which is like 0.4 seconds faster than London Humphreys, who transferred from Vanderbilt to Georgia and is known for his straight line speed. They also brought in a Virginia Tech transfer in Chance Fitzgerald, who has good size, but really never saw the field much on offense for Virginia Tech. And then an interesting storyline that I didn't realize wasn't nationally known, and apparently was tweeted out like it was breaking news at SEC Media Days. Vanderbilt has a guy that's going to be playing both sides of the ball in Martell Height. He did that in the spring game. He didn't just come in for a play or two. He was legitimately running the route tree out there during the spring game. He's Vanderbilt's cornerback one, and also is going to be brought in on the offensive side of the ball, and is their punt returner, number 25. So he's going to be a big key piece as well. But really the strength of this offense is the tight end room. I mentioned Eli Stowers. They also have Cole Spence and a guy named Bryson Coleman, who's kind of a wide receiver / tight end combo kind of guy. He had a broken collarbone last season, but the reports from him before the injury were just incredible. He was making catches that nobody else was on the roster. And you mentioned the offensive line. This is what I wanted to end with, because the offensive line is where everything starts and everything ends for Vanderbilt. They have Chris Klanakis coming back. They do a unique strong tackle, quick tackle type of combo, but they lost 3 key starters from last season. Stephen Lasoya, who was a Mississippi State transfer. They lost him to graduation. They lost Gunnar Hansen transferring to Florida State, and they lost the heart and soul of that offensive line in Stephen Hubbard, aka Big Glow. But I mean, they did their work in the transfer portal. That's why I'm not completely panicking. They brought in a guy named Bryce Henderson from South Dakota, who's the highest rated returning PFF tackle in the entire SEC. They also brought in depth pieces in Isaiah Glass. I think he's from Oklahoma State. And then the highest graded guy, or whatever you want to call it, Jordan White from Liberty, who's likely going to be playing center this season. If you've played college football 26, I think he's the second highest overall player on Vanderbilt's roster. He's an outstanding pickup. He's going to be a stud on that offensive line, but they're going to need guys to step up that you might not necessarily think about. They brought in more depth pieces like Gunnar Givens, a guy from Virginia or Virginia Tech as well. And then they have guys that are returning like Kevo Wesley. Is he going to be able to take that step forward? So that's a lot of names that most people don't give a shit about. But it's always the question of the offensive line for Vanderbilt was good. Not just for a Vanderbilt O-line. They were pretty damn good just in general. They were middle of the pack in the SEC. The sack numbers were there. So that's going to be the question. Can the offensive line perform at the same level they did last season and actually allow Vanderbilt to occasionally push around SEC defensive lines, which you saw for the first time in a lot of years last season, including that Alabama win. If you watched it, that was no fluke. Vanderbilt held the ball for about 42 minutes, and that was because the Vanderbilt offensive line dominated in the trenches.
Will, switching sides of the football, obviously when you talk Vandy and you talk Clark Lee, you think defense. It's Steve Gregory that's going to take over defensive play calling this fall, which an interesting move by Clark, especially after it worked out pretty well last year what they did, but handing it over to Gregory. Certainly he'll be involved in it, but Steve Gregory taking that over. An experienced front seven headlines the group. It feels like there's a lot of depth on this side of the football. Will Corday Sedor returns on the edge, Miles Patterson, Langston Patterson, Nick Rinaldi, Bryce Cowan, a lot of guys headlining that linebacking core. And then you mentioned Martell Height, your cornerback one, Marlon Jones Jr., headlining the corners. And you replaced both safeties, but C.J. Hurd and Marlon Sewell look to step up in the back end of the defense. But it feels like this should be a strength, right? When we talk Clark Lee and just his track record when it comes to defense and all the returning experience, what's the sense you get when you look at this defense and what you're expecting from this group?
There is a lot of talent in that Vanderbilt front seven. And that is typically, and you'll ask any Vanderbilt fan, where Vanderbilt has always struggled is having any sort of consistent pass rush, getting those guys on the defensive line. They've had good linebackers. If you go back in Vanderbilt history, they've had plenty of guys that have been drafted into the NFL. Zach Cunningham was a recent guy. You go back to Jonathan Goff, Chris Marv. But on the defensive line, that's where I think this Vanderbilt defense can be different. One name you didn't mention is a guy named Zaylen Wood. He was probably Vanderbilt's best defensive lineman last season prior to an injury. I think game 3, game 4, somewhere around there. He was out the remainder of the season, number 15. He's a difference maker on the defensive line. Vanderbilt on the edge also brought in a very interesting guy in Keanu Coote from Alabama. Actually saw the field a little bit for Alabama last season, a former 5-star guy. Had some call them differences, keep it clean with the coaching staff and transfer it over to Vanderbilt. He is the type of talent that simply Vanderbilt does not get on a regular basis. He is a freak athlete. On the interior, they did lose Demarion Thomas. He transferred to Oklahoma State or Texas Tech. I'm getting the schools all mixed up in my head, but he was a late transfer, and that's a big loss on the interior. But Vanderbilt does have Wataha, 6'7", 311-pound guy, to eat up blocks in the middle. They also have Glenn Seabrooks, a 6'1", 6'2", 340-pound guy. And then they have Texas transfer Aaron Bryant, who is probably close to the MVP in the spring game. I know you don't want to take too much from one spring game, but he looked like a dog out there. And then you mentioned Sid Nora, Purdue transfer, that performed really well last year. Miles Capers, a guy that's a good edge rusher. And then you go to the linebacking room, which I think that group is probably the strength of this defense. You have Langston Patterson returning. You have Brian Longwell returning. You have Nick Rinaldi returning. You have Bryce Cowan returning. You have Prince Colley returning. There's just a lot of talent in that room, and it's going to be interesting to see how Vanderbilt manages a crowded position group with a lot of guys that probably deserve snaps, but you can only have 2 or so on the field at the same time. And then one name I do not want to forget mentioning, because he's Vanderbilt's best defender, and he plays that, I'm going to screw up, the star position, so that combo safety linebacker in Clark Lee's 4-2-5 defense. That's Randon Fontenette. He was probably Vanderbilt's best defensive player last season. He's coming back this year. He's a future NFL guy. He's going to be wreaking havoc. He's the one that had the pick 6 return against Alabama and idiotically almost stepped out of bounds before he got the pick 6, but whatever. He got the touchdown, so we'll let it slide. Moving to the secondary, I think the safety room will be okay. You lost 2 guys in DeRicky Wright and CJ Taylor, but to be honest, Trevor, my co-host on the Dore Report, is a big DeRicky Wright guy. I don't want to say this because I really like DeRicky Wright. I think it's almost addition by subtraction losing him. He's a little bit oversized to be playing safety, but he was just such a leader that you had to have him out there. Always was battling injuries. You brought in CJ Hurd from FAU, the Sea Snake. He's electric. I don't want to say you're going to upgrade over a guy like CJ Taylor, who is basically a 4-year starter, but CJ Hurd is as close to a plug-and-play type guy as you can possibly get. And then you mentioned Marlon Sewell, who's a returning captain, but I think a guy you're actually going to see play as many or just as many or more snaps as Marlon Sewell is Dante Carter, a former 4-star guy, played a few snaps last year but was a little undersized. Is really going to be looking to take a big step forward this season, seeing a lot more of the field. Really athletic guy, really high ceiling, but I'll also say really low floor. Can have a few brain lapses. The cornerback room, man, you've got Martell Height. He is a solid corner. I am happy with Martell Height. After that, you have a huge amount of question marks on this Vanderbilt roster. They're bringing back Colby Taylor, who's like a 6'3", lanky corner from last season, has all the physical tools, but struggles to keep his head on straight, commits some dumb penalties. You'll see him on the field, but he's back. Another depth piece. You have Mark Davis and Marlon Jones, both coming off season-ending health issues last season. Both of them returning were FCS transfers. They didn't see the field last year. You don't really know what you have in them. And then a guy that I think could end up taking over that CB2 role is Jalen Lackey. He was on the team last year. You saw him slowly improve, but he's a lot more of a consistent presence than any of those other 3 guys I named. And just to throw in one last name, Vanderbilt also picked up a transfer from the Tennessee Volunteers in Jordan Matthews, a guy that I could see playing quite a bit of slot corner possibly in this defense. So great name, Vanderbilt legend name. So he has a lot to live up to with the name Jordan Matthews, but there's a lot of unknowns in that secondary and guys that really need to prove what they can be, but there's a lot of raw talent there, I think. A lot more raw talent than you've seen Vanderbilt have in years past.
Will, special teams is something that typically gets overlooked, but when it comes to the Commodores, it was a strength last year. You mentioned the name Brock Taylor. He returns at place kicker, was really, really good for Vandy a season ago. Nick Harborer from Washington State comes in to take over the punting duties, and you already mentioned Martell Height looks to be a big-time factor in the return game. Just talk about quickly what you're expecting from the specialists. Is it something you think Vandy can use to their advantage yet again in this upcoming season?
I mean, Brock Taylor, in my opinion, is one of the best kickers in the country. He has a cannon of a leg. I think he's a guy at worst is going to get looks from NFL teams whenever he's draft eligible. He's only going to get better as he continues to get older, get more experience. Vanderbilt had an incredible punter last year, but once again, Vanderbilt might be turning into punter U. Nick Haber, Washington State transfer, a guy that's just going to go back there, do the job. One bit of a question mark, and I know this is a dumb, really in the weeds, nitpicky thing. Vanderbilt did lose their long snapper from last season, Julian Ashby. We're a special teams pod here. We're a fan of the special teams guys. But they brought in a graduate transfer from Durham Harris. So I'm assuming he'll take over and do the job just fine. But, you know, a long snapper is one of those things that you never even think about until you have a shitty one. And then it's all you can think about. So fingers crossed on that front. Martell Height, though, I want to key on him in the return game. He's going to be on the field a lot. And Vanderbilt has a bit of a history of having some dynamic returners. You can go back to Earl Bennett, DJ Moore, way back in the day, getting back to my childhood. But it's been a while since Vanderbilt's had a real threat in that punt return game. And last year, Martell Height had some electric returns. It'll be interesting to see what Vanderbilt does on the kickoff return, if they want to put their wide receiver number 1 back there again, and Junior Sherrill, who had the kickoff return touchdown against Tennessee during rivalry week, if people remember that one. It'd be interesting to see if they keep him back there returning kicks, or if they want to keep him healthy for the offensive side of things.
So, Will, as we look at this 2025 Vanderbilt squad, for what it's worth, 13 starters returned, 6 on offense, 7 on defense. Obviously, in this new portal era, that's not as important a stat as it used to be, but still 13 starters are back. And as you take a look at this 2025 schedule, it's interesting because obviously you think about last season and what the Dores did. If they're going to repeat what they did from a season ago, obviously get back to a bowl game, maybe even exceed that, they're going to have to go to some of those venues where they pulled some of these upsets and duplicate those performances. Obviously, you think early on, you've got the big non-conference game at Virginia Tech, a night game at Lane Stadium. You open up SEC play at South Carolina. That's going to be a night game in a place that you haven't beaten the Gamecocks in almost 20 years. You will have an opportunity, by the way, Will, to get revenge against Georgia State in Nashville on a Saturday night on September the 20th. But other notable games, I mean, you kick off the month of October at Alabama. That one is obviously going to have some juice to it after what happened last year. You get LSU at home, Mizzou at home. You got to go to Texas. You got to go to Tennessee. And then, of course, Diego Pavia is going to have his opportunity to knock off Hugh Freeze yet again, which, funny enough, is Vanderbilt's homecoming game, which is it's perfectly fitting. When you look at this schedule, Will, your thoughts on Vanderbilt's path to duplicating, if not exceeding, what they did a season ago?
So I've made the statement multiple times. I can't give a record prediction right now. We're saving that for the Dore Report. We'll be doing that about the week before, or a couple weeks before the kickoff of the season. The schedule is brutal. I think it's second strength of schedule in the country, even though outside of Virginia Tech, the non-cons are not exactly dynamos by any stretch of the imagination. But Vanderbilt lost to Georgia State last year. So what the hell? Who knows anything about anything? Looking at the schedule, I don't want to use that as an excuse early because let's be frank, if you're in the SEC and your name is Vanderbilt, the schedule is always going to be brutal in the strength of schedule aspect. Even that said, it's pretty tough. South Carolina, just Vanderbilt could be full of 5 stars. South Carolina could be a freshman high school team. Vanderbilt might never beat South Carolina again. The gods have cast a spell upon Vanderbilt. South Carolina cannot lose to Vanderbilt. That Georgia State game, I don't want to predict this because it can look really dumb. I think that is going to be a bloodbath of all bloodbaths. I mean, I think Vanderbilt might, whatever that spread ends up being, as long as it's not more than 27.5, 28.5 points, I think Vanderbilt beats them by 30 plus. I've used this phrase as a guest on podcasts before, is Vanderbilt could be a lot better this season and still have the same exact record. That's a very real possibility when you look at this, but I will go to the positives here. I mean, you have Missouri at home this time around, and they're going to be a little worse this year, I believe, with Pribula at quarterback. They'll still be good, but I think they'll be a little worse than what they were last year. Burden gone. You have Auburn at home. You have Kentucky at home. I think Tennessee is going to be a little down from what they were last year. I'm not an Aguilar believer. Virginia Tech, lost quite a bit of talent, even though they returned drones. I know that is on the road in a hostile environment. I think, as crazy as it sounds, that week 2, game 2 for Vanderbilt against Virginia Tech is going to be the turning point of the season. If Vanderbilt beats Virginia Tech in week 2, I think there is a real possibility or not even a possibility, it's going to be. The worst case is Vanderbilt sitting at 4-1 going into that Alabama game, and that's likely the game of the week with what happened the year before. So there's a lot of brutal games on this schedule. I mean, you've got 3 top 10 teams in the stretch of 4 weeks, or 4 games basically, for Vanderbilt, at Alabama, LSU, and then at Texas. That's a brutal stretch for any team in the country. But looking at, man, I'm trying to make a pitch for why Vanderbilt's going to improve, but you look at the schedule and it's hard not to chalk up 2 or 3 losses right off the rip when you look at what they've got. But I can't really do that. I group things into like winnable games, less winnable games, and then guaranteed losses, or whatever you want to call them. It's a brutal schedule, and that's kind of where I'll leave it at on that. It's a brutal schedule, but they've got the talent to go into every single game fully with the expectation to win. Is that going to happen? We'll see. I know this team believes that they can beat every single team that they are facing on the schedule. I don't think that is coach speak or player speak or anything. I think this team is a few screws loose. And I don't know I know we're probably closing it out here pretty soon, but I kind of want to draw back to something Clark Lee touched on at media days, touched on when they had the SEC Inside, or whatever you want to call it, before Vanderbilt's spring game. Clark Lee gave a presentation that basically said Vanderbilt had 8 one-possession games last season. Vanderbilt was 4-4 in those games. Vanderbilt was just as close to 2-10 as they were to 10-2, and Vanderbilt ended up 6-6. And the message that you hope your team is going to take away from that statistic, which is a stat. People are just shitting on the team for being like, man, we're going to be competing to play in the CFP. I'm like, they were 4 possessions away from doing that last year. So, I mean, Vanderbilt was right there in a lot of games, lost to Texas by 4, lost to Missouri by 3, lost to Georgia State on some crazy 50-yard bomb by 4 points. Just those 3 games right there. And Vanderbilt sitting at 9-3 and in the conversation last season. So there's reason to be optimistic in Nashville, but even if you get better this season, so did everybody else in the SEC, and a better Vanderbilt roster and better Vanderbilt team could still result in a 6-6 season, just like last year, or could even result in a regression back to 5-7. That's always a possibility.
Well, obviously, we're looking for Diego Pavia to repeat his magic from a season ago. Vandy take a step forward, yet again, another step forward, and I'm interested what success will look like following up that 7-win season, winning a bowl game. But I want to close with this specifically, because it's hard to quantify that, right? Like, what is success? There's a very obvious, hey, get back to a bowl game, put yourself in position to pull a big upset or 2, win some of those big games. But I want to focus on this because I know you've talked about this a lot. We've talked about it on social media. I think we've talked about it off the record. We love to have the conversation this time of year. Who's overrated? Who's underrated? I'm not hearing Vandy mention a lot in the underrated combos, and I know that you feel like there's a lot of people who are not giving the Dores their just due, or giving them their proper chance to do some big things this year.
Look, so last year we all know Vanderbilt was the cute underdog story, and I think the roster has taken offense to the term cute, because it's like, is it cute to beat the ass of the number 1 team in the country? I don't know. That wasn't a fluky win. If you watch that game, they beat them. I mean, that is what it is. Trying to think how to say this. If you were to replace, I fully understand the hate that Diego Pavia and this Vanderbilt roster, but mainly Diego Pavia, is getting for the statements he has made. There are a few different ways I want to say this, so I'll try to remember and keep my train of thought here. If you replaced the V on the side of the helmet and the Vanderbilt across the chest and made them Auburn or made them Oklahoma, with the talent they have returning, with a quarterback returning, running backs returning, tight ends returning, everybody but one receiver returning, a revamped offensive line, the entire D-line returning outside of one guy, the entire linebacking room returning outside of one guy, all of the corners returning outside of their worst corner from last season, possibly an improved safety room, kicker returning, a new punter that's a great transfer from Washington State, a consistency with the coaching staff in the second year under an offensive scheme fully implemented with the same guys. Nothing they're saying is out of line with expectations. If they had Auburn, an AU on the side of their helmet, nobody would be given their quarterback guff. If nobody would be given anybody any type of issues with the statements they are making, it's just because it's Vanderbilt. And right now, last year it was cute. Like I said, this year, what they are saying is challenging the powers that exist. Really what they're saying this year. And I think the vehement vitriol, to use some V for Vendetta language there, the vehement vitriol all stems from Vanderbilt's not supposed to do that. Vanderbilt's supposed to have a year like they did with James Franklin, where they go 8-4 and they go to a good bowl game, and then James Franklin leaves for the next job. Well, this year, Vanderbilt has the opportunity to actually make a statement. I'm not saying they're going to do it, but they can. And you mentioned him earlier, Diego Pavia. You said the personality they haven't had in a while. I'm going to say the personality they have been needing for 50 years and never had. The guy that's willing to make those statements, stand behind him, and not give a shit if people hate on him, attack him personally, whatever it is. If you start your career at New Mexico Military Institute with no offers, and then just want to go play for the New Mexico Lobos, and they won't offer you. So you get an offer from New Mexico State, win the starting job over a former 4-star guy, become the Conference USA Offensive Player of the Year, transfer to an SEC program, which you've stated is always your dream. Then in your first season at the helm of that SEC program, beat the number one team in the country for the first time in that program's history. Yeah, let's just say that guy's going to have a little bit of belief in himself. Is that so hard to believe that this guy might, that the hate or whatever is not really going to get to this guy? I'm sure he got a lot of hate when he was like, I'm going to be the starting quarterback for an SEC program when he was at New Mexico Military Institute. And here he is. So I'm not saying he's going to do it, but there's nothing illogical about what Diego Pavia is saying. Going back to the thing, they lost 4 games last season, went 6-6, lost 4 games by an average of, I think, like 4.2 points, all one possession games. This team was close last season, and they're returning every single key piece outside of 1 or 2 guys. So, yeah, there are high expectations for a reason, and that's where I'll leave it. If you just replace the name on the front of those jerseys, nobody would have an issue with the statements that are being made, and nobody would be calling this team overrated and, oh, you're not going to sneak up on anybody this year. It's like, I don't think this Vanderbilt team thinks they're sneaking up on anybody. I think they just think they're a damn good team. And we'll see this fall. All the questions are going to be answered once we hit the gridiron in about a month.
Will Byrum of the Dore Report, the best in the business. He and his co-host, Hack Squat Jim Duggan, you may know him as on the Twitter machine. Again, love you guys. Y'all do an incredible job talking all things Dores. In case folks have been living under a rock, let them know where they can check y'all out.
So follow us across every social media. We're mainly active on Twitter. Follow us at the Dore Report. We are also a part of the On3 Publisher Network. So go to thedoreport.com, subscribe to a premium membership, and join our premium member message board behind closed doors. We host a weekly podcast available across all platforms, but give us a subscribe on YouTube. That we usually record on Tuesday nights, release episodes Wednesday mornings. So give us a follow across any platform, and follow the wild ride that should be the college football season in 2025, because no matter what happens, there's going to be a lot of things said about Diego Pavia. It doesn't matter if it goes well or goes poorly. There are going to be eyes on Vanderbilt football this season, unlike we have had ever. And I'll make that statement fully, ever.
Well, you're the man. I appreciate you taking the time. Let's definitely do it again soon.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Chris.